Hello, everyone. I'm Kira Phillips. So glad you're streaming with us on this Friday. Breaking news this hour. President Biden declaring a major disaster in Kentucky after some of the worst flooding in the state's history. The governor telling us at least 16 people have died, and that number is expected to rise. Our team is in the storm zone right now. Heading for a recession? Well, the U.S. economy is shrinking the second straight quarter. What this could mean for your wallet and what you can do to prepare right now. And new details on the proposed Russian prisoner swap to bring Brittney Griner and Paul Whelan home. What Russia's top diplomat is saying about the possible exchange. But we do begin with that breaking news in Kentucky, one of the worst flooding events in the state's history. Kentucky's Governor Andy Beshear telling us that 16 people have died and that he expects the death toll will rise. The National Guard now deploying hoist and rescue aircraft while entire neighborhoods and towns are underwater. Our Mola Lengi is there in Hinman, Kentucky, and joins us now with more from there. Mola, what can you show us?
You know, as you mentioned, the death toll climbing a little bit more, up to 16 now. Every time the governor has spoken, we've gotten a death toll update that continues to climb. He says that he expects it to significantly increase, and a lot of that is based on the fact that so many people are still missing. They are, as you mentioned, still conducting a lot of search, a lot of rescue missions. They will be doing that throughout the state. They were doing that all day yesterday. More than 100 water and swift boat rescues yesterday. There were about 50 air rescues using helicopters trying to reach people who couldn't be reached by boat. So that will continue again today. And hopefully the death toll won't significantly climb anymore. Water is starting to recede in some parts of the state, including where we are here in Hinman. And when it does that, we're starting to get a sort of a picture of the devastation. You know, you see cars that were tossed around, homes that were ripped off of foundations. You see this fire truck that was carried over here and then, you know, thrown to the bank of this creek and wedged underneath this bridge. So the devastation is far and wide, and we're really starting to get a glimpse of that. People are starting to pick up the pieces to their lives in a lot of these communities. Here in Hinman, the mayor tells me they are still missing several people, so those search and rescue operations will continue. And you got to remember, this is just one community of many that are facing the same sort of situation. Power still out for a lot of people, about 25,000 people still without power throughout the state. A lot of folks still don't have any internet connection, any cell service. It is spotty at best. The governor did mention that, you know, while you may fear that a loved one who you're trying to get in contact with is missing, perhaps it is maybe just the spotty cell service. So a lot of dynamics still at play. This is still unfolding right before our eyes, Kira.
And we'll continue to talk about it, Mola, all throughout the day. Appreciate that latest report. We also have new data from the Commerce Department showing the economy shrank from April to June. It's the second straight quarter where the economy declined, and the latest sign that we may be headed for a recession, as some economists are saying we're already there. Chief Economics Correspondent Rebecca Jarvis has more on what that means.
As debate grows over whether the U.S. is already in a recession or will be, the chairman of the Federal Reserve says we aren't there yet.
I do not think the U.S. is currently in a recession. And the reason is there are just too many areas of the economy that are performing, you know, too well.
President Biden striking an optimistic tone.
If you look at our job market, consumer spending, business investment, we see signs of economic progress in the second quarter as well.
Regardless of what it's called, Americans are feeling the pain in their wallets. According to a growing number of economists, including Bank of America and Goldman Sachs, the signs of recession are forming, with inflation up 9.1%, prices rising on food, shelter, and transportation. And while gas prices are starting to drop, it still costs over 35% more to fill up than this time last year. In California, one of the most expensive places to get gas, drivers are paying an average of $5.66 a gallon, making it almost $100 to fill up a 16-gallon tank.
It's really hard to stick to a budget because now what I pay for gas a month is almost what I pay for rent a month.
Consumers also facing double-digit increases at grocery stores.
I used to do my monthly groceries for $200, and now it's costing me around $350.
All right, Rebecca Jarvis, thank you so much. Let's bring in now ABC's business reporter Alexis Christoforous and ABC's politics reporter Brittney Shepard for more on this. Alexis, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, as you mentioned, says that we're not in a recession because too many areas in the economy are doing well. But some economists say that we are. So where do we really stand?
Hi, Kira. I think the answer is it depends on who you ask. Yesterday, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen also spoke publicly and said she does not believe we are in a recession yet. She also pointed to the strong parts of the economy, which continue to be consumer spending. We're still spending at a pretty good clip, even though we might be spending less on goods and more on services like travel. So, you know, the Fed right now still trying to fight the highest inflation that we've seen in 40 years, the inflation rate above 9% last month. And we got a new report out today on inflation, and this is looking at inflation, a particular gauge that the Fed really focuses on. That is also at its highest level in decades. So those 4 interest rate hikes by the Federal Reserve not doing enough yet to trickle through the economy and start to bring those prices down. Another big area of the economy very strong, the job market. So a lot of folks are saying it's hard to have a full-blown recession when you have such a tight labor market.
So, Brittney, the Inflation Reduction Act that Congress is working into the reconciliation package is a lot smaller than what Democrats had in mind when President Biden took office in 2021. But it still does quite a lot, right? How is it changing?
You're absolutely right, Kira. President Biden originally wanted a $2 trillion, that's with a T, spending package back in the winter. And there are Democrats and some Republicans said that just can't be done. But still, we have about $400 billion of new spending. Some of that's for climate provisions, incentivizing Americans to do things like get electric cars, use solar panels on their home. It helps, I think, crucially, Medicare negotiate drug prices about certain kinds of drugs with pharmaceutical companies. That to lower the cost for some of America's oldest voters, senior citizens, to hope to ease their burden on their wallet. It caps inflation, and it offers subsidies to some folks bought into the Affordable Care Act. But none of this is set in stone for Democrats. This was a deal penned by Joe Manchin and Chuck Schumer, kind of unlikely bedfellows over the last 10 days. But there's still one big Senate holdout. No surprise here, Arizona's Kristen Sinema, who actually neglected to join a Democratic call yesterday about discussions of how to get this bill into reconciliation and over the finish line. And even if they get Sinema on board, the Senate parliamentarian, because of all these weird arcane rules around reconciliation, has to say that this inflation bill is up to muster, and she hasn't done that yet. And even if all of those things happen, the vice president might have to come down because Senator Joe Manchin is sick with COVID, and if he is not able to vote in the chamber, Democrats aren't going to be able to pass this without some kind of Republican buy-in, which right now they just certainly do not have.
Well, Alexis, the president says the legislation would help reduce pressure on the economy. Will this really impact our pockets on a day-to-day basis with prices continuing to surge in so many areas?
I think the jury is still out. It's too soon to really tell. I mean, a lot of economists agree that those tax increases that are built into that, the lower drug prices that Brittney just talked about, are all aimed at reducing the federal budget deficit. So the likelihood of prices coming down over time is pretty good. But I think that's the key phrase, over time. This is not a quick fix. The effects of this probably won't be felt for months, even years to come. So for those of us looking for some relief from these high prices right now through this legislation, it's probably not going to happen, and it certainly won't be the quick fix that the Democrats would like to see in time for those midterm elections.
So, Brittney, the House also voted to pass that $280 billion CHIPS and Science Act, which would subsidize domestic semiconductor manufacturing, also invest billions of dollars in science and technology innovation. So how significant is that specifically right now as we're going through such a tough economy?
Well, the Democrats are hoping that messaging is going to be very significant, which the Americans can hope that they can see more dollars back in their pockets. The Democrats in the White House are saying that there are chips in everything, in your phone, in your computer, in almost every consumer electronic that most of these Americans are going to want for the holidays. I know it's weird to think about Thanksgiving and Christmas, but these are what voters are thinking about now. They're just trying to figure out how are they going to even afford groceries and gas. And they're hoping that messaging sticks. But like we just heard, it's unclear if even though that the semiconductor bill has been passed into law, the Senate and the House have both approved, it's unclear when Americans are actually going to see any of those dollars back in their wallet. And that's really, really nerve-wracking for the White House, because they know that we're right up against August recess. There's really not much legislatively that can be done from now until November for those critical midterms. If they're unable to deliver, unable to prove, and unable to take a victory lap on this legislation, then voters really won't be happy, and they won't be seeing the benefits of this.
Well, I think it's the U.S.-made part of the semiconductor chips, right, that could help us grow the economy, Alexis, right?
You said it, absolutely. I mean, the fact that this country can now be not as dependent on other countries for those critical semiconductor chips that do run just about everything we use on a day-to-day basis is huge for this economy. So that would definitely help when it comes to supply chain issues regarding these all-important semiconductor chips. But again, it's going to take time. All these investments are great news for the economy, but it takes time to get those factories up to speed. But over the long term, always a good thing when the U.S. can be, not as dependent on others.
All right, Alexis, Brittney, thank you, ladies. Coming up, the proposed prisoner swap to bring Brittney Griner and Paul Whelan home. What Russia's top diplomat is saying about that possible exchange next. We are so glad to have you streaming with us here on a Friday. Let's talk about that possible high-stakes prisoner swap now. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is expressing interest in meeting with Secretary of State Antony Blinken to discuss an exchange of prisoners. And ABC News senior White House correspondent Mary Bruce has more details for us.
Russia is ready to talk. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov announcing they're working to schedule a call with Secretary of State Antony Blinken to discuss a possible prisoner swap. Lavrov saying this morning it will be interesting to listen to Blinken's proposals. Russia's top diplomat had been playing hard to get, his spokesman saying just yesterday he would pay attention to this request when time permits. ABC News has confirmed the Biden administration is offering to exchange notorious Russian arms dealer Victor Bout for former Marine Paul Whelan and WNBA star Brittney Griner. The White House is refusing to discuss the details, even after they publicly announced they had put the, quote, significant proposal on the table.
Is this still a negotiation, or is this your best and final offer that you all have put out there?
I really cannot go, just for the privacy and the safety of the process. I cannot say more. But we are sharing that we did put a substantial offer on the table.
The White House hoping by going public with the offer they can pressure Russia to come to the table. Trevor Reed, the former Marine released in a dramatic prisoner exchange with Russia in April, says false hope can be devastating.
I didn't want to have that hope, and I didn't want to have the possibility of me losing that hope.
We do know the proposal is focused on Griner and Whelan, likely leaving out another detained American, Mark Fogel, his sisters speaking out.
It is not an exaggeration to say a 14-year sentence is a death sentence for him.
And he needs to be part of this deal.
Fogel, a teacher, was detained last August on drug charges, similar to the charges against Griner. His lawyer says he was carrying a small amount of marijuana used for chronic back pain, but a Russian judge sentenced him to 14 years in a prison camp.
Mark is wrongfully detained, and we want to get him out. And whether it's part of this deal or another deal is not of great importance.
Fogel's family and lawyer telling us it's a sign his detention is politically motivated, forcing them to speak out loudly now as he marked his 61st birthday in prison on Thursday.
Happy birthday, Mark.
Yeah. Sorry, it's hard.
Now, as for that call with the Russians, the foreign minister says they're discussing a time and date for this, but it isn't likely to happen today. The foreign minister is traveling and says he won't be able to tackle this until he's back in Moscow. Kira.
All right, Mary Bruce from the White House Force. Mary, thanks. And we're getting a unique perspective now on what Brittney Griner and Paul Whelan are actually going through. Our Terry Moran spoke to Trevor Reed, that U.S. Marine who was released in April after 2 years in a Russian prison. Take a listen.
Trevor, thank you for being with us. And I just want to ask about the conditions. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. What do you think Brittney and Paul are going through right now?
Yeah, conditions in Russian prison are obviously terrible. You know, when I first walked into my cell there and looked at how that looked, it reminded me of something that you would see in like a movie about a prison in the Middle Ages. So something from Braveheart or from a movie like that. That's pretty much the conditions that prisoners still live in Russia. And obviously your treatment there by their prison authorities, punishments that they have for you know, violating their rules there, the pressure that they put on you to try to comply with their court process, all of those things are pretty difficult to imagine for someone from a modern democracy. There were a lot of questions there about, you know, how serious was the U.S. government in making these negotiations happen? How serious were the Russians in making these happen? What were the possibilities of those happening? And I think that in Paul and Brittney's situation right now, if they have received that information about potential, you know, deal that's on the table, I think that it's a lot more cut and clear for them than it was for me, because the White House has gone out and publicly announced that they are putting this deal on the table, and I think that that's definitely a good sign.
Our thanks to Terry Moran and also Trevor Reed for that interview. Our Patrick Reevell joins us now from Odessa to talk more about the prisoner swap and the new developments with Ukrainian grain exports. Patrick, you covered Trevor Reed's case for years. What do you make of Sergei Lavrov's request for clarity from Blinken now about this prisoner swap? Does that mean a trade is imminent here?
Hi, Kira. Honestly, I think Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov's reaction in general has been deliberately unenthusiastic. And that's because the Russians, I think, believe right now that they can get more from this deal. You know, I think it goes back to why has the White House put this deal on the table publicly? And I think that's because they know that they need to try and push the Russians into doing it, because ultimately this deal has been on the table for weeks, and for some reason the Russians aren't taking it. And I think the Russians sense that there is a lot of pressure right now on the White House around Brittney Griner's case in particular. And so I think they can get more. And so I think, unfortunately, right now, it doesn't feel like a deal is imminent. Having said that, of course, they're going to meet. And I think right now we really just don't know how close the deal is.
So how urgent, then, do you think this deal is for Griner and Whelan at this point? Just knowing what you know and also looking back at Trevor Reed's experience.
Yeah, as you say, you know, I covered that case for a long time, and I covered Paul Whelan's case since he was first arrested back in 2018. You know, I've actually spoken to him from prison. He's kept in a former gulag, and the conditions there are terrible, you know. There's very little heating, the cleanliness is very poor, there's widespread tuberculosis in these prisons, and, you know, the situation is also very bad for Brittney Griner inside the detention centers there. It's very difficult for them to go out. You know, obviously, they can barely ever go outside. They're kept inside their cells most of the days. And so I think, you know, it's urgent for them, because every day that this goes on, every day is very, very difficult for them.
So let's also talk about this UN deal to end Russia's blockade that has worsened the global hunger crisis. You know, grain could now start being shipped out of Ukraine today or tomorrow. You actually spoke to the U.S. ambassador there to Ukraine, who was at the port in Odessa. What did she tell you about this?
Yeah, some pretty major developments out here in Odessa actually today. I mean, a week ago, this UN deal was brokered to allow cargo ships to begin leaving Ukrainian ports that have been blockaded for months and which have been loaded with millions of tons of grain, which has been unable to get out and which has been worsening this global hunger crisis. And, you know, now what we've been hearing is that the first ships are hopefully going to leave from here in Odessa either today or tomorrow. President Zelensky was here today, and he said that he hoped that the ships would leave as early as today, at least by tomorrow. And, you know, I spoke, as you say, with the US ambassador down in the port, which you can see behind me, and I think we have a bit of sound from that interview now. How confident are you that Russia will agree and that it will stick to this deal?
It's a question. I mean, 24 hours after the deal was agreed a week ago today, Russia bombed this very port where we're standing. So I think it's imperative on Russia to live up to its commitments and to implement the agreement it signed on to, and imperative on all of us to ensure that Russia lives up to those commitments.
Is there an obstacle right now to these ships leaving?
There's no obstacle.
You know, I think that there is still a real fear that there's a real fear that whether this deal will still actually hold, because ultimately a week ago Russia did fire a missile strike into the port behind me, and I think until these ships actually move, there's not going to be certainty that the deal's going to hold. But for now, Ukrainian officials are telling us they do believe, they hope at least, that they will move. And you know, just in the last little while, we've been seeing even ships on the horizon seeming to we're seeing small warships seeming to try and do drills out there, which I think is a sign of how much security is also out ahead of this movement.
What about Russia, though, and how they pose a threat to these shipments? That's still a concern, right?
Absolutely. I think very much until these ships actually leave here in Odessa, we won't know for certain that this deal is going to hold because of that missile strike. You know, Ukrainian officials are hopeful that this will go ahead, but they certainly aren't just taking it on trust. I mean, as far as we understand it, though, right now the final routes out of the city are being agreed through the waters behind me, which are heavily mined. And so, you know, as far as we understand it, Russia and Ukraine right now are agreeing on the final routes that will allow these ships to start moving. And so we'll be watching closely whether that happens either today or at least in the next 2 days.
Our Patrick Reed there in Odessa, Ukraine for us. Patrick, thank you. And coming up, the monkeypox outbreak and the new warning from officials about containing the virus. More straight ahead. Glad you're streaming with us today. The WHO declared monkeypox a public health emergency of international concern. And earlier this week, and in San Francisco, the mayor has declared monkeypox a local public health emergency that goes into effect on Monday as cases continue to rise in that city. Let's bring in Dr. Mark Abdelmalek, ABC News medical contributor. Also, he is a surgeon in dermatology. All right, Doc, the WHO recommends that countries like the U.S. implement response actions now to curb human-to-human transmission of monkeypox. So what type of precautions are we talking about here, and what type of precautions should we be taking right now?
The most important thing now is that people are aware that this is happening, and this is a disease that's contagious through direct skin-to-skin contact, and particularly in high-risk groups. And right now that includes groups that include men who have sex with men as the predominant group. Now, people need to be aware that anyone can get monkeypox. And so health officials everywhere, especially in San Francisco and New York now, want people to know it's time to pay more attention and to watch out for those signs and symptoms of monkeypox.
Tell us about those symptoms and warning signs then. Give us some details.
So typically early on, you'll have fever, maybe a headache, feeling unwell. And then pretty quickly, the characteristic findings of monkeypox and what helps us distinguish it from many other diseases is that you start to see distinctive rashes. And those can be anywhere. They can be in the groin, in the armpits. And importantly, you'll also start to see swollen lymph nodes. But the most important thing is if you have a rash and you're feeling unwell and you think you may be at high risk, talk to your doctor.
Good advice, Dr. Abdelmalek. Appreciate your time today.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
I'm Kira Phillips. ABC News Live continues with more news, context, and analysis right after this.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.